All
Okay.
right. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Dowry, and I serve as receiver for the City of Chester. Today is Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024, and we are gathered for the Municipal Financial Recovery Advisory Committee meeting, MPRAC for short. As usual, actually today we have a full team, joined by Andrew Sheaf on behalf of the Governor's Office, Deputy Director. Good afternoon, sir. And on behalf of Delaware County Council, Ms. Kelly Diaz, good afternoon. And on behalf of the City of Chester, Mayor Roots and Councilman Davis. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
And as usual, we are joined by Mr. Cody Dill, assisting us from the Department of Community and Economic Development, and Mr. Vijay Kapoor, serving as Chief of Staff for this engagement. So let's jump right in. We circulated a summary of the last meeting, as well as any public comment received since then. Our first item would be to address any public comment. Mr. Dill, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, thank you. So last week, as mentioned, the agenda for this meeting and public comments received were circulated to the committee. Would like to thank the public for sending in the comments, and if there are any others, just want to again encourage anyone listening to the meeting, if they would like to address the committee, please send your comments to info@chesterreceivership.com. Again, that's our resource account email address. It's info@chesterreceivership.com.
Thank you, Mr. Dill. And shifting from public comment to comments of the committee, are there any statements or issues that the committee would like to address? All right, well, hearing and seeing none, we will shift to today's presentation. Mr. Kapoor has worked since the last meeting, as promised, on laying out a timeline for the water asset procurement and RFP process. So without further ado, Mr. Kapoor, would you take it from here?
Happy to. Good afternoon, Mr. Receiver, members of the committee, and members of the public. As the receiver noted, I have a presentation here that is going to get into some of the some more detail regarding the water asset procurement. As many of you know, this is a very important for the city of Chester. It is also a complicated transaction for the city of Chester. And we are doing our due diligence. We're taking our time, and we're sort of trying to approach this in a methodical way, because we know the importance of it. We know the importance of it to the city. We know the importance of it to ratepayers. We know the importance of it to the community, to employees. And so we want to make sure we get it right. And what I have today here is some initial information regarding the procurement, as how we intend to move forward with it. It's not going to answer all of the questions, and I will just say a lot of these items here are subject to change, so I want to be clear about that. This is really for informational purposes. But to speak directly to some of the entities out there who may be interested in submitting a proposal with respect to the monetization, this is probably going to be a very important and at least hopefully some initial substance to assist you as you look at the situation here. So let's talk about the purpose of today, and then let's get into some of the more details. So as you all remember, on August 26th, the city filed a plan of adjustment, which noted its interest to proceed with the procurement process in order to monetize its water assets. And when we talk about our water assets, we talk about the assets of the Chester Water Authority, the Stormwater Authority of the City of Chester, and the reversionary interests in the city's reversionary interest in Delcora. One of the things that was very clear in that filing, and we will re-emphasize today, is that a key requirement through this monetization process is that the water assets must remain publicly owned. And so what we're going to do today is provide some more information about this process, both for interested parties as well as to members of the public, about how we intend to proceed on it. I do again want to say the qualifier that this is our best and good faith effort at this point to provide guidance to the public and interested parties. It is a very complex transaction, and we are doing our best to both balance the ability to provide information while at the same time be clear about trying to do this in the, in the best way, in the best interest, obviously, of the city and everyone involved. So the presentation should be considered informational only. Both the process that I'm going to discuss today, as well as the timeline, is subject to change. And interested parties here really should only rely on information in official procurement documents. So I want to be very clear about that. So let's talk about the procurement process itself. And this is a really important area, a really important item that is new and that came as a result of a lot of internal conversation about how best to proceed. Given the complexity of the procurement, we have decided to break the procurement up into two stages. The first stage is going to be referred to as a request for qualifications, or an RFQ. And then the second stage is going to be an RFB, which is a request for bids. And what we're going to talk specifically about today is the request for qualifications. This is not unusual for a procurement of this type or of this size. We think it's important to break it down into these two steps in particular, based on our requirement that the assets remain publicly owned. And we will provide more information at a later date regarding the request for bids. But the key component up front here is the request for qualifications, or an RFQ. As part of the procurement process, so folks know, the city will reserve the right to reject any and all proposals, irrespective of whether any such proposal is the only, I should say, proposal received, or one of a number of proposals. So that is standard language in most procurement documents that we see. So that should not be a surprise to anybody. The other item that I want to be clear about is that we will also reserve the right to separately request, negotiate, and accept bids from any Pennsylvania municipality, municipal authority, or other public entity outside of the RFQ or RFP process. So this, allows us to continue to have discussions in mediation with the various entities, and we want to be clear about that as well. That this process does not foreclose those discussions from continuing as well. We will also reserve the right to modify or terminate the RFQ or the RFB process at any stage, if the city determines in its sole discretion that such action is in its best interests. And again, I want to be clear, these items, particularly the first and the third bullet point here, are standard for any public sector procurement here in Pennsylvania. So I want to talk about and go back to a little bit of the paramount objectives. And I want to call attention to one of the items here, which is appearing for the first time, I guess, publicly, but certainly not for the first time that we have been considering. So obviously, the financial compensation is important to the city, as well as the requirement that the water assets remain publicly owned. But there are other items here that are of paramount concern to us. Those include maintaining affordable rates for all ratepayers, preserving public sector employment opportunities. Let me skip this one and I'll come back to it. Promoting cost-effective capital reinvestment, enhancing service to customers by providing access to capital, and boosting operational efficiency. So that's reducing costs and improving service delivery. The item that I want to call folks' attention to in today's presentation is the third bullet, and that is preserving public access to and the use of the Octorara Reservoir, either through the creation of a land trust or other protective measures. We know from the history of the Chester Water Authority that the Octorara Reservoir is very important to members of the public. It's used for recreational purposes. It's certainly a beautiful reservoir in and of itself. And we want to be clear here that we are very much open to preserving access and continuing the use of the reservoir for the public. And so much so that we are very much open to the creation of a land trust or other protective measures. By no means do we want to use this monetization process, as a way of sort of excluding some of that access. And so what we're trying to do here is, again, indicate to the public, indicate to potential bidders that this is one of the objectives that we view as paramount during this monetization process. So let's talk about the request for qualifications, and there may be some folks here who know what this means, and there may be folks who this is the first time they've heard what that phrase means. So the purpose of an RFQ is to provide prospective proposers an opportunity to basically formally express their interest on bidding on a sale, lease, or other form of monetizations of the assets. And that's including the defeasance or assumptions of certain liabilities as applicable, right? That includes, addressing the liabilities that any of these entities have, as required by the Municipal Authorities Act. Prospective proposers who fail to respond to the RFQ or whose submissions in response to the RFQ are deemed unqualified cannot participate in the RFB process. So the way this is kind of broken up is you've got an RFQ process in the beginning that says prospective proposers who are interested in bidding on these assets first need to quote unquote qualify. So there's kind of a gatekeeper first step, and then those entities that qualify will be able to move on to the RFB process, where we will actually have bids on the assets. And the qualification, so qualification for the ability to bid, will be based on a determination by the city in its sole discretion that the prospective proposer meets the requirements highlighted in the RFQ. And what we will be doing, what a committee will be doing, is it will be assessing each respondent's qualifications in the areas of experience and technical and financial capability. Again, something very standard for an RFP, or excuse me, of a procurement of this type. So more information about this. We're not going to restrict the number of prospective proposers that may qualify under the RFQ. So we were happy to have as many. In fact, we would like as many as possible here in order for competition. For certain prospective proposers, they may find that forming a team with partners may enhance their abilities to meet the requirements of the RFQ. We're very much open for entities to come and submit their qualifications as a team. And that may consist of a prime/subcontractor relationship, a partnership, or a joint venture, or any other arrangement that is legally permissible under the laws of the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania. The key here, though, is no change in the composition of a team after the RFQ process is complete would be permitted without the prior consent of the city. So we want that to be want folks to know about that. But again, we're open to teams coming in and submitting their qualification. So I want to talk a little bit about some of those qualifications. And again, this is kind of where we are now. We'll talk a little bit about the timeline at the end of the presentation, but let's talk about kind of, again, as we are right now, once the RFQ actually comes out, that will take precedent over anything that is said here. But where our thoughts are right now is to qualify, the prospective proposer has to demonstrate sufficient team structure with respect to the following areas. So the adequacy of the team structure or of the entity to provide sufficient assurance that all technical and financial obligations will be met. So basically that whoever is proposing here is going to meet whatever the technical and financial obligations are that we set forth. That there is clear definition of the roles and responsibilities of team members and key personnel. And that the disclosure of controlling interests and team integrity are also put in there. We want to be clear that we don't want anything hidden over here. We need parties, and we're going to require parties to be open about, who has what interest in the respective entities. So to talk more about some of the proposer information here. So that's kind of high level. Let's talk a little bit about kind of what we expect the RFQ to likely request from potential proposers. So that would be a description of the team, including any equity investors. It would include the roles of the team members and key personnel. That it would require specific identification of who or what entity or entities would operate the assets if they're successful in winning the bid. Any controlling interest. So the individuals or companies who hold a major or controlling interest in each team member, that is holding at least 51% ownership interest or voting rights in the prospective proposer. Who are the expected advisors are. So identifying the firms and individuals who are expected to act as legal, financial, or other advisors for the team. Comparable projects. So other projects, other similar situations in which team members have participated, and references. So again, these are kind of our initial thoughts here. We'll wait for the actual RFQ to come out, but wanted to give you some sense of some of that high level information. Now we want to talk about technical capability. So that's some of the basic information, some proposer information. Let's talk about some of the technical capabilities that we will likely require as part of the RFQ. That is operation and maintenance of water, wastewater, and/or the stormwater systems as applicable. Customer service improvements and enhancements while maintaining affordable rates. Customer safety, security, and environmental responsibilities. That includes but isn't limited to compliance with applicable environmental laws and regulations, consent decrees, long-term control plans. All of that is critically important, and the prospective proposers will need to demonstrate their abilities in these areas. The ability to execute an efficient, timely, and seamless transition plan. The ability to undertake required capital improvements, to offer other system enhancements with a demonstrated knowledge of technologies, and the ability to generate and grow sufficient revenues to fund operations and any payment structure of the city or to the city. So in terms of kind of specifics that we will likely be asking for with respect to technical capabilities, we will likely be asking for the information about their abilities to operate and maintain assets and facilities similar to the water assets, a commitment and evidence thereof to achieving the highest standards of customer service and satisfaction, and the ability to address and resolve safety and security issues, including emergency response support. So now let's also talk about financial capability, right? We've talked about kind of the proposer information. We've talked about the technical capabilities, so the ability to kind of operate and run or ensure the operations and the running of the various water assets. Let's also talk about financial capabilities. So any prospective proposer at this point, given kind of where we are, must demonstrate financial capability with respect to the following areas. So the financial capability to make any upfront payment and undertake other financial commitments such as installment purchase payments or rent obligations required, again, as part of any type of financial payment to the city. The financial ability to maintain, upgrade, and expand the water assets, including any capital additions. Adequate sources of operating capital. The ability to secure financing. The ability to finance future growth of the assets. The transition of existing employees as employees of the prospective proposer. And the maintenance of public ownership and potential operation of the assets. So in terms of kind of the specific information that we will likely be asking for here, as it relates to the financial capability, is the financial capability to close the transaction, the ability to raise financing, and importantly, the ability to mitigate any rate increases on the rate base. Want to talk a little bit here about the selection committees and kind of how we envision that the decision makers, as it were, would be organized and set up. And I want to just start with, under the Act 47 plan modification, the receiver has the sole authority to appoint the selection committees. That was confirmed in the plan modification. It was confirmed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court earlier this year. It is very clear in the language of the plan modification that the receiver has the sole authority to appoint members of the selection committees. So the receiver is going to appoint the following committees. An RFQ committee that will determine whether the prospective proposer is qualified. An RFB committee, which will review and vote on each bid. And this is an important one that we want to talk about here too. And that is an advisory committee who will consult with the RFB committee, but will be non-voting. And what we really wanted to do here was kind of broaden the input that the committee was getting to other entities and to other groups who might be interested and may be able to share their perspectives on what they think would be appropriate and what they think that the committee should be taking into consideration as it moves forward. I want to again be very clear that that committee, the advisory committee, would be a non-voting committee. But having kind of worked with certain committees, I can tell you that their input would be very much taken into consideration and is important because I think those of us who are working in this area know that we don't have all the ideas and that it is helpful to get the perspective of other groups and other entities, regardless of what their interest is. And they may have a narrow interest, and that may be okay. But again, it's helpful to have that kind of that broad perspective and that broad sense of input. We'll be very clear here that all committee members will sign non-disclosure agreements. We want to be very clear about that it's important that this information, is appropriately handled as we may be dealing with some sensitive information that may be submitted. And so that is where we're looking at in terms of the selection committee. And here's a timeline. So this is an initial timeline that I want to provide. And again, I want to be clear, this deals mostly with the RFQ process. The RFB process will happen after the RFQ process, but we don't necessarily have a timeline for that yet. And I've done that intentionally because we think it's important to kind of first focus on the RFQ process. And then as that process goes along, we will be able to, I think, have a sense of what the RFB kind of process timeline would look like. So here's an initial timeline, again, which is subject to change. By November 6th, what we would like is prospective proposers, could be purchasers, submit emails to this following email address indicating their interest. And that email address is chesterrfpresponse@ballardspar.com. Ballard Spar is the city's bankruptcy counsel. What we'd like here is prospective proposers to send an email to say, we're potentially interested in submitting a response to the RFQ. This will not bind anybody to doing so, and the purpose of doing this is so that we know who might be interested. So when the RFQ is released, we will make sure to send it to those entities. And I would guess as well, prospective purchasers or others who perhaps may want a copy could also use that email address. We are targeting November 20th for the RFQ release. So that would be the official, what I would consider to be the procurement document that would kind of provide a lot of the information and specifics. December 20th is when, in our timeline, we would be having the deadline for RFQ question submission from prospective proposers. Typically, when you do an RFP or an RFQ, particularly one that would be as probably complicated as this one, sometimes prospective proposers have questions that they want to ask the entity that is putting out the RFP. Or RFQ, and that is typical. That is normal. It's generally part of any RFP that a municipality puts out, or any RFQ that a municipality puts out. And we want to provide ample time here for both the ability to ask questions, and we would encourage prospective proposers to ask as soon as possible, and to give us enough time to also answer those questions and provide them to the various groups. Because that's also going to be hitting the holidays, as everyone can tell, December 20th, we are going to be targeting January 15th at this point for the RFQ qualification submission deadline. So that would be the date by which prospective proposers would submit their responses. And then on February 12th, 2025, that would be the qualification notification to prospective proposers. So between January 15th and February 12th, that is when the RFQ committee would work to review the bids, review the qualifications, responses to make sure that, and to make sure that they qualify with respect to the requirements that are going to be set forth in the RFQ, in the official RFQ, and that we will notify the vendors or the entities or the authorities or whoever's deciding to express interest and submit a response. Those folks would then move on to the RFB process, which would be happening obviously after February 12th. And again, we'll have more information on that well in advance of that. But again, we want to kind of provide this. We want to kind of take this in steps. We are again, we want to do this right, and so that's why we're sort of taking this in a methodical fashion. I know a lot of people may have a lot of questions. Everybody wants to get their questions answers. Everybody wants certainty. We are doing our best to provide as good faith as we can with how we again intend to proceed. So our next presentation, our next MFRAC, is going to take place on November 12th of 2024. At this point, we do not have a topic, but rest assured that we will probably by that time. And you can watch it live or recorded on the receiver's Facebook page at www.facebook.com/Chester Receivership. For any entity or anybody who would like a copy of these slides, we post these relatively soon after these MFRACs. Mr. Deal posts them to the receivership website. That is chesterreceivership.com. Look at the top of the page where you would see MFRAC, and what you'll see as you scroll down the page are different years. And if you click that, you will see the slide decks from different presentations. And this is obviously October 22nd of 2024. We anticipate having this slide deck out up in a couple of hours. And the recording will obviously be here. The recording will also be put forth on YouTube as well. So that is the presentation that I have for the committee, for the public as well. Happy to answer any questions from the committee or hear any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Kapoor. Certainly a lot there, and it's going to be a busy next four months just for the RFQ process. So we're into next summer before the RFP process would be potentially complete.
Let's see. So potentially, right.
Right. Important to say that on parallel track simultaneously, we will continue the mediation process through the federal courts and continue to mediate with CWA and Delcora. And hopefully all of this becomes null and void here in the very near future. But thank you for today's presentation. I'll open it up to the committee for any questions or comments.
I guess I have more of a, question, comment. You know, in the very beginning of this presentation and consistently, the receiver's office has said that this must remain publicly owned. That's what you're attempting to do. You've only ever said that. But somehow, as I read the press, I often see that in stories, it leads with that line that you intend that this must remain publicly owned. We know there's a couple entities that stepped up right away that said that they believe that, that approach may be, robbing a rich answer to the solution. And then following that, it usually occurs that there's people who comment against you guys that you want to take this to private hands. And maybe it's just me. I just can't understand where the disconnect is and what can be done with messaging to cement the fact that the receiver's office continues to say this must remain publicly owned. And for those that do comment, and I'm not talking about those entities who would like to see it to go another way, but mostly it's individuals or members of the public who insist that you guys are not trying to remain in publicly, to have this go in publicly owned hands. Do you think this process, this RFQ is going to better educate, those people? I guess I'm kind of tired of hearing from people that either aren't listening or not believing that is your intent, that this must remain, these assets must remain publicly owned. Is there anything we can do communication wise to kind of reduce that kind of noise, or do you think it's going to persist throughout this entire process?
I do think a certain amount of it will persist no matter what, right? We're not going to be able to convince everyone. But I do have to turn, I think, your question kind of back on the committee a little bit and ask for your support. If you aren't already, please, you guys hear it firsthand and are deeper in this than probably anyone else, and know what it is that we've been saying over and over again, and how the documents and how the approach has been crafted to date. So I have to ask for your support and your help to help carry the message there to the right parties. There is trying to not to say the wrong thing here and be politically correct. It does feel like there may be one entity kind of pushing and steering the conversation in that direction. But what leverage point does it take to get to convince them and to work with them as opposed to being opposing each other through this process? I don't know. We haven't hit the right leverage point yet, but I kind of have to ask for your help there to continue to carry that message, and we will continue to reiterate it and state it and answer every question that comes our way, so to speak. But there is going to be the certain element there that won't believe it until they see it. So the faster we can get through the next let's say through the next year, whether it be through mediations or through this process, one way or another, we will build that confidence and that trust, or earn that trust sooner or later.
I'm sorry. I would say I think, Mr. Receiver, you're being quite polite. I would also say in some respects, there may be folks out there who are intentionally distorting the message. Why? Not exactly sure. And what I'd like to do is just to kind of demonstrate to the public and to show here. So again, hopefully this helps tamp down some of these views. I'm going to read you a paragraph from the receiver, the city's response to the Chester Water Authority's motion for relief from stay, which was filed in bankruptcy court on October 10th of 2024. This is from paragraph 42. This was filed with the bankruptcy court. It is on the docket. You can read it for itself.
BJ, would you mind zooming in a bit?
Is that better? How's this?
Thank you.
Okay, this is from paragraph 42. The simplest course for the receiver to follow would be to sell the city's interest in the water assets to the highest bidder, declare victory, and walk away. This is what the city's retirees and two of its unions favor. However, selling off the city's interest in the water assets would be yet another large-scale quick fix that would ultimately find the city right back where it has been since 1995, in financial distress, because doing so does not address the city's ongoing structural deficits. Moreover, privatization of the water assets would not be in the best interests of city residents. Privatization of water and wastewater assets in Pennsylvania has led to extraordinary rate increases of between 44.9% and 166.6%, which Chester's already financially burdened residents can ill afford. That is a paragraph from a filing that the receiver made in bankruptcy court that everyone can read and should put to bed any conspiracy theory that the receiver is somehow trying to privatize the system. And the other plea that I will make is to some of the news outlets who are covering this. Using the word privatization and saying the receiver wants to privatize is inappropriate. It is not what the receiver is trying to do. The receiver has been clear about it for years. If you want to use the term monetization, that is an absolutely appropriate term. That is the right term. But using the word privatization and hearing that over and over again, and whether you're an interest group, whether you're the media, whether you're just sort of talking about it, that's not what the receiver is trying to do. And in that filing, I don't know how to say it more emphatically than the way it was done there. So if after this, folks want to continue to use that term and folks want to continue to use that information, from my view, to me, it appears to be intentional.
Thank you, Mr. Kapoor. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee? Well, hearing none, I want to thank everyone for gathering here today as well. Vijay, thank you for keeping your commitment and getting the timeline and explanation of the RFP process out there. More to come, of course, on that front. It's hard to believe, but our next meeting will be in November already. But we will get the meeting summary out as well as an invitation for the next meeting here in short order. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.